Look closely at a $1 bill. To the average person, it's just a piece of paper, a blend of 75% cotton and 25% linen. It has no intrinsic value. You can't eat it, you can't build a shelter with it, and since 1971, you can't even exchange it at a bank for a single grain of real gold. Yet this simple piece of paper dictates the global economy. It buys crude oil in the Middle East, high-tech microchips in Taiwan, real estate in London, and grain in South America. For nearly a century, the United States dollar has reigned as the undisputed king of global finance. It accounts for over 80% of all international trade transactions and constitutes nearly 60% of all foreign exchange reserves held by foreign central banks. This single reality gives the United States what former French Finance Minister Valéry Giscard d'Estaing famously called an exorbitant privilege. Because the dollar is the world reserve currency, America enjoys a superpower no other nation on earth possesses: the ability to print money out of thin air, export its inflation to the rest of the planet, and buy tangible hard goods, cars, steel, oil, electronics, in exchange for green ink and paper. But how did a young nation built on rebellion turn its domestic currency into the financial operating system of planet Earth? Why is every major nation forced to play by Washington's rules? And more importantly, what dark, unspoken measures has the United States taken over the last 50 years to ensure that no country, no leader, and no alternative currency ever threatens the throne? Today we are taking a deep dive into the hidden machinery of the global financial system, from the secret handshakes in New Hampshire to the sands of Saudi Arabia and the classified geopolitical chess moves that reshaped nations. This is the dark, untold history of the US dollar empire. Welcome to AI Business Edge. To understand the empire of today, we have to travel back to the summer of 1944. World War II was reaching its bloody climax. Europe was in physical and financial ruins. Factories were destroyed, farmlands were burned, and governments were drowning in debt. Across the Pacific, Asia was equally devastated. There was only one major power left standing, with its infrastructure entirely untouched by bombs: the United States. Furthermore, while European nations were buying weapons and supplies during the war, they paid America the only way Washington demanded: in physical, heavy gold. By 1944, the United States possessed over 70% of the entire world's official gold reserves. Fort Knox was overflowing. In July 1944, 730 delegates from 44 Allied nations gathered at the Mount Washington Hotel in the secluded town of Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Their goal was simple, yet terrifying: rebuild the collapsed international monetary system from scratch. The British delegation, led by the legendary economist John Maynard Keynes, proposed a neutral, global currency called the Bancor, a currency managed by an international body to prevent any single country from dominating world trade. But America, represented by Harry Dexter White, held all the cards. America had the factories, the military, and most importantly, the gold. Washington issued an ultimatum, and the Bretton Woods Agreement was born. The deal was structured on a simple promise: the US dollar would be chosen as the world's global reserve currency. To guarantee trust, the United States promised that the dollar would be backed directly by physical gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. Any central bank in the world could hold US dollars, walk up to the Federal Reserve, hand them the paper, receive pure, physical gold in return. Every other national currency, the British pound, the French franc, the German mark, would then be pegged directly to the US dollar. For 2 decades, the system worked like clockwork. The dollar was literally as good as gold. World trade boomed, and the United States became the economic engine of the world. But behind closed doors, a fatal flaw was silently growing. The flaw was simple human greed and political ambition. During the 1960s, the United States entered the Vietnam War, a conflict that cost hundreds of billions of dollars. At the same time, President Lyndon B. Johnson launched massive domestic welfare programs known as the Great Society. To fund both the war and these programs without raising taxes dramatically on American citizens, the Federal Reserve did what governments always do when cornered. They quietly started printing far more dollars than they had gold in Fort Knox. It didn't take long for international central banks to notice. The French president, General Charles de Gaulle, was the first to call America's bluff. De Gaulle realized that the US was exporting its inflation to Europe and printing fake paper backed by nothing. In 1965, de Gaulle took action. He loaded French naval ships with stacks of US paper dollars, sent them across the Atlantic to New York, and demanded France's physical gold back. Other nations followed suit. Germany, Spain, and Switzerland began quietly redeeming their paper dollars for gold. The gold in Fort Knox was draining at an alarming rate. America was facing a catastrophic bank run that threatened to bankrupt the superpower. By August 1971, the situation reached a breaking point. The U.S. gold reserves had dropped to dangerous levels. If the trend continued for a few more months, the United States would be forced to admit default. On Sunday evening, August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon interrupted regular television programming to deliver an emergency broadcast to the American public. He announced what he called a temporary suspension of the dollar's convertibility into gold. In reality, it was neither temporary nor a suspension. It was a global default. Nixon tore up the Bretton Woods Agreement, unhooked the dollar from gold, and left the entire world holding billions of paper dollars that were suddenly backed by absolutely nothing. The gold standard was dead. The era of pure fiat currency had begun. Without gold backing, panic swept through international markets. The US dollar plunged in value. Inflation spiked across the Western world, and central banks realized they had been tricked into holding paper. Washington needed a solution, and fast, to save its currency from becoming completely worthless on the international market. What followed was one of the most brilliant, ruthless, and secretive diplomatic maneuvers in modern geopolitical history. In 1974, President Richard Nixon and his Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, dispatched a secret delegation to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. The goal was to meet with the Saudi royal family and strike an unprecedented deal. The terms of the secret agreement were simple, effective, and devastatingly powerful. First, the United States promised absolute military protection to the Saudi royal family, their oil fields, and their kingdom. America would supply state-of-the-art military hardware, combat training, and an unshakable guarantee to defend the House of Saud against any internal rebellion or foreign aggression. In exchange, Saudi Arabia agreed to 2 non-negotiable conditions. Every single barrel of crude oil exported from Saudi Arabia must be priced and sold exclusively in US dollars. No British pounds, no French francs, no German marks, only American dollars. Saudi Arabia would take their massive excess oil profits, known as petrodollars, and reinvest them directly back into U.S. Treasury bonds, effectively loaning their money back to the U.S. government to fund American debt. By 1975, every other member nation of OPEC followed Saudi Arabia's lead and agreed to sell their oil exclusively in dollars. Think about the sheer genius and tyranny of this setup. Gold was no longer needed to back the dollar. Energy was the new gold. Oil is the lifeblood of industrial civilization. Every country on Earth, whether it's Japan, Germany, India, or Brazil, needs oil to power its factories, grid, trucks, and militaries. But to buy oil from the Middle East, these countries could no longer use their own national currencies. They were forced to first sell their own real goods and services to the United States in exchange for paper dollars, just so they could turn around and buy oil to survive. Overnight, Washington artificially created an endless global demand for the US dollar. America could print paper out of thin air, send it overseas to buy physical energy and goods, and watch as those same dollars flowed right back into US banks and treasury bonds. The petrodollar empire was officially born. For nearly 3 decades, the petrodollar system operated flawlessly. America enjoyed decades of unprecedented financial dominance, low domestic inflation, and cheap consumer goods. But what happens when a sovereign nation decides it no longer wants to play by Washington's rules? History reveals a dark, consistent pattern that is impossible to ignore. Whenever a leader tried to bypass the dollar and sell oil in a different currency, their country was met with swift, overwhelming destruction. Let's look at the facts. Exhibit A, Iraq 2000. In November 2000, Iraqi President Saddam Hussein took an unprecedented step. He declared that Iraq would no longer accept US dollars for its massive oil reserves under the UN Oil for Food program. Instead, Saddam officially switched Iraq's oil trade entirely to the newly created European currency, the euro. At the time, Western financial media mocked the move. But within 2 years, the euro had gained 17% in value against the dollar. And other oil-producing nations began quietly watching Iraq's experiment with great interest. Less than 3 years later, in March 2003, the United States invaded Iraq, citing weapons of mass destruction that were never found. Saddam Hussein was captured, his government collapsed, and one of the very first executive acts taken by the U.S. installed Provisional Coalition Authority was to immediately revert Iraq's oil pricing back to the US dollar. The threat to the petrodollar was eliminated. Exhibit B, Libya, 2009. 9 years later, another leader attempted to challenge the monetary order, this time on a much larger scale. Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi proposed an ambitious plan, the creation of a unified African currency, backed entirely by physical, tangible gold, known as the gold dinar. Gaddafi had accumulated over 140 tons of pure physical gold in Libya's central bank. His strategy was to unite African and Arab oil-producing nations into a single monetary bloc. Libya, along with other African producers, would stop accepting US dollars and euros for their vast oil reserves, demanding payment strictly in gold dinars. Had this succeeded, it would have shifted the economic power dynamic of the entire African continent, freed developing nations from Western debt, and stripped trillions of dollars in artificial demand away from the US financial system. Declassified emails from former US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton later confirmed that Western intelligence agencies were acutely aware of Gaddafi's gold-backed plan and viewed it as a direct threat to the dominance of the US dollar and French franc in Africa. In 2011, NATO launched a military intervention in Libya. Gaddafi was overthrown and executed in the streets. Libya collapsed into a fractured state, and its 140 tons of gold disappeared from public accountability. Once again, the message to the world was loud, clear, and undisputed. Do not touch the dollar. For half a century, military force and economic sanctions were enough to protect the dollar's supremacy. But in February 2022, Washington played its most aggressive card yet, a move that many economic experts believe marked the beginning of the end for the petrodollar era. Following the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, the United States and its Western allies executed an unprecedented financial strike. They froze over $300 billion worth of Russia's foreign central bank reserves stored in Western accounts and kicked Russian banks out of the SWIFT international payment system. To Washington, it was a display of absolute financial dominance. But to the rest of the world, it was a terrifying wake-up call. Central banks in China, India, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, and the Middle East suddenly realized a dangerous truth. You don't truly own your US dollar reserves. You're merely renting them from Washington. If a nation's foreign policy strays from Western interests, those assets can be erased with the click of a button in a New York server room. This triggered a silent, massive global shift known as de-dollarization. Nations began searching for an exit strategy. The BRICS alliance, originally made up of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, expanded rapidly to include major energy titans like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iran, and Ethiopia. Together, this economic bloc represents over 40% of the world's population and controls a massive share of global energy production. And their primary objective is crystal clear: build an alternative financial ecosystem that does not rely on the US dollar. China and Saudi Arabia have already begun settling oil trades in Chinese yuan. India is purchasing Russian crude oil using Indian rupees and UAE dirhams. Central banks across the global south are buying physical, tangible gold at the fastest pace in recorded history, replacing paper dollar bonds with real assets stored inside their own sovereign borders. The global monetary system is fracturing into a multipolar world. So, does this mean the US dollar is going to collapse to zero tomorrow? Absolutely not. Currency empires do not die overnight. They erode slowly, then all at once. The US dollar still possesses massive advantages: deep, liquid financial markets, unmatched institutional infrastructure, and the most powerful military machine on the planet. However, the fundamental pillar that supported the dollar for the last 50 years, the forced requirement for every country to use paper greenbacks for energy and trade, is permanently weakened. As the U.S. national debt surges past multi-trillion-dollar milestones and interest payments consume a huge portion of the American federal budget, printing money becomes the only way to service that debt. But in a world where foreign nations are no longer forced to buy those dollars, exporting inflation becomes harder and harder. We are standing at a historic crossroads. The era of a single, unquestioned global reserve currency is coming to a close, giving way to a new paradigm of localized trade, gold-backed digital assets, central bank digital currencies, and decentralized financial networks. The empire of the dollar was built on gold, saved by oil, and enforced by geopolitical power. Understanding how this financial engine works is no longer just historical trivia. It is essential knowledge for anyone looking to navigate, protect, and build wealth in the shifting global economy. What do you think? Will the US dollar retain its dominance through digital technology and financial adaptation? Or are we witnessing the rise of a new BRICS-led global standard? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive documentary into global finance and geopolitical business, hit that like button, share this video, and make sure to subscribe to AI Business Edge for more high value, no nonsense breakdowns. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.